Sometimes there's a joke that project managers don't do anything.
Are you hiding something?
No, I'm not saying anything. There is a huge amount of difference going from services to product. And you have to have some sort of an answer. You can't be like, well, I don't know. It's a good question. What do you want? Because the project managers always did the job that I knew I didn't want to do.
Welcome back to my chat with Joonha. In the previous part, Joonha was explaining his transition into the role of team lead and then solution architect. If you missed it, please go check it out. In this part, Joonha will explain a little bit more his transition into the role of product manager. Let's begin. What were your thoughts about working with PMs? And there are different types of PMs, so there are different people you worked with, some probably better than others. But what were your thoughts?
Well, I really enjoy working with you, Pierre. I feel like you're
Thank
fishing
you.
for that compliment. No, all jokes aside, I I got to work with various project managers with various styles and various level of effectiveness in in fulfilling their role. And almost always I found it valuable to work with the project manager. I think sometimes there's a joke that project managers don't do anything, but
Mhm.
I only tell you that joke because you're my friend. I don't actually mean it. Because the project managers always did the job that I knew I didn't want to do, which was taking accountability for something that you mostly don't have control over,
Right.
right? Which is, making sure that things are done on time, make sure that things are done correctly, um, and, controlling the scope. You were always sort of juggling between um, being the bad guy, but also, making sure that the client is happy, right?
Mhm.
And it's not a very easy role to do.
I like what Joonha said here. The project managers always did the job I knew I didn't want to do. And it's true, project managers do a lot of tasks that other people don't like doing, like taking meeting notes, taking care of budget, raising tickets, all of those administration tasks. And the goal here is really to allow the team to focus on the most valuable tasks that they should be focusing on. So as a project manager myself, whenever I have a little bit of free time, I go check up on my team and see if they need any help. And whatever I can complete on their behalf is something else that they don't have to worry about. So they can focus on the most valuable item or task for the company. All right, let's continue.
Some of the best project managers I work with were really good at saying no without saying no. And I
Right.
think that was extremely important skill to have. And it's not just the project managers that need to learn that, it's consultants as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that we have to say no to are different as a project
Yeah.
manager as a consultant, but not ever being able to say no will definitely make you a bad consultant as well as
Yeah.
a bad project manager. Because sometimes the customer doesn't even know exactly what they're asking for. They just have an idea of what they think they need, but they need your help to dig into the why. Why are they asking for this? What are they ultimately trying to do? And is the way they're asking for it the best way to go about it? And if not, how do you propose something that ultimately solve their problem, but it's not what they're asking for at that moment, right?
Right.
And, working with the project manager to convey that and then having the project manager then communicate that to the customer. And some project managers have figured out how to do that very effectively. Some are still working on it, but the ones that have figured that out, I've always appreciated them.
Right.
And the part that are less exciting but still extremely important, which is project like timelines, meeting minutes, looking for the budgets. Like I didn't want to do any of that stuff, but it always felt good to me that someone is looking over those things and ensuring that we're not going over budget and that this delay in this one particular task does not affect our overall deadline or the critical path. So I always valued working with a project manager, and when I had to work with someone who wasn't as effective in that role, I really felt the impact.
When you think about it, the goal of assigning a project manager into a team is to increase the level of success of that team on that project. And assigning a bad project manager into a team could have devastating impacts. It can be very demoralizing for the team, and some people may not want to work with that project manager or even talk to that person anymore. And when the goal was really to empower the team to do better, then you may start to see negative impact of that project manager. And the last thing people should have to worry about is the project manager on their own team. But anyway, let's keep watching. So for if there are people watching that are maybe in those situations, like what would you tell to them that, like, do you have any advice on how to work better with yourself as a consultant or a solution
Mm.
architect?
Mm. It's important to still be curious about why there's a challenge when it comes to implementing something, or why something is taking longer, or why something didn't go as you expected. And I think the best project managers kind of know the exact level of details to ask for. You don't want to dig too deep, right? Because you
Mhm.
don't want to get stuck in the weeds. As a project manager, you have to oversee the whole project. So you can't go at the same level of depth that a consultant is going at. But you also can't be too high and just
Right.
like, oh, I don't need to know any details. I don't just, is it done or not? And you think that might be the best way to spend your time because you have so many other things going on, but the devil's always in the details. And figuring out the right level of details to find out from a consultant, I think some of the best project managers I've worked with have figured that out. And unfortunately, it's not straightforward, right? It's not like there's a manual or
Right.
an equation you can plug in. It's like, oh, this is the level of detail I have to find out. It's kind of trial and error. It's more of an art than science. And I think it's, you know, you have to try different levels. Like sometimes you got to go really deep and then you figure out, okay, I didn't need to go that level of detail. So I'll scale it back a little bit. And then if you scale back too much, you miss an important detail and ends up, kind of blowing up the project and like, oh, I should have dug a little bit more. And you kind of fine tune. And I think that's what experience is, right? That's what time allows you to do is kind of find that perfect balance in between knowing just enough to be effective in your role as a project manager.
Yeah, I think you framed it very well by at the beginning by saying remain curious
Mm,
and keep learning. So and
right.
ask questions. But yeah, I think
Absolutely.
I would agree with you. If you want to be effective at your role as a project manager, you need to know enough to be able to talk about the details enough, but you don't
Mm,
need to know everything.
no, absolutely not. And I prefer you don't.
Are you hiding something?
No, I'm not saying anything. It's just that's what's best.
If you are watching this and are a project manager that thinks that technical work is not part of the project manager responsibility and that it's too technical, I strongly encourage you to challenge those thoughts. The best PMs I've seen and the most respected ones are the ones trying to understand the work that other people do. How can you effectively plan a project when you don't really know how other people work? After you worked as a solution architect, you decided to take your career to the next step, which was to move into product management.
Right.
So why did you make that decision?
Mm. Yeah. So it ties back to what I was saying before. And I was sort of alluding to this is, once I was about 4 or 5 years into my career as a consultant, I was really craving for something like building something longer term. And one of the aspects I told you I loved as a solution architect was designing things. And I really enjoyed designing a solution for a customer. And then I could see very naturally how that could extend to designing a product. You know, a solution, I say loosely, is tailored for one particular customer, but a product needs to be tailored for everyone, all
Mhm.
customers that could potentially buy your product. So there's different challenges with building a solution for one customer and building a product for many customers. And I started to dabble into product management in my own ways. I had built an internal tool for our services team. It was used to manage issues that occurred during the configuration process of the project methodology. So this typically follows after the design. You're actually configuring the software. And when the customer goes in and checks what you've configured and it doesn't match their expectations or there's some sort of a defect, it would be a way for them to go in and log those things, and you could track them and make sure that they all get resolved before you go live. And before I really took on this tool, a lot of this was done through Excel, which is not very effective because you end up having multiple copies. You got to send it back and forth through emails. And our software was already SaaS cloud based, and there was no reason why we shouldn't use that ourselves. So
What Joonha worked on is called an issue tracking application that is being used during project implementations. I've seen so many project teams working only with emails and spreadsheets, but this is so inefficient. If you are working on projects and don't have such a tool today to raise and track issues, please start looking into one.
I did not originally build that tool, but somebody did. And unfortunately, that person left the company, but I thought it was so valuable that it shouldn't just die as soon as that person was no longer with the company. So I sort of carried on the torch, and I kept building it and improving it and got feedback from colleagues who were using it and make more changes. And I really realized I love that process of that feedback, improvement, and then feedback and improvement into just evolving the product into something better than before. And a product is never complete. And so, in a way, it's kind of depressing because you'll never be done. But in a way, it ensures that you'll never be bored as well. And I wanted to take on that sort of challenge when I was, towards the 5 year, 6 year mark as a consultant. And I knew that it was going to be difficult to be a product manager at a different company. And it just made so much sense to try to become a product manager at my existing company because I know the product so well at this point.
Right.
And that's one of the, one of the key paths of becoming a product manager. There's many different ways, but a lot of times it's like an engineer or a consultant who's worked at that company for a long period of time and they know the product inside out, and they're able to transition into a product manager within that company before going somewhere else. So that's exactly what I did.
Right. It's often overlooked how much experience you can gain by just being a consultant within the services department of an organization. You get to use the software in such a large variety of ways that nobody in the company really do. And it really sets you up nicely to switch later on into a different role within the same organization. So if you were wondering if you should start a career in services, well, maybe that's the answer. And you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but how was your transition at the end of the day? How long did it take you before you felt comfortable? Yeah.
Yeah. It was sort of a rough start because there is a huge amount of difference going from services to product. Yeah, maybe others might disagree, but to me, it wasn't just the hard skills that I had to learn. It was a different mindset because again, when you've worked as a consultant for a long period of time, your goal is to ensure the success of the customer you're working with. And you work with one customer at a time. Sure, if you're able to multitask, you might have 5, 10 projects even. But for each of those projects, you're working with one customer.
Right.
And you're tailoring the solution for one customer at a time. Right. So you can dig really deep into just one customer and build something that works for just one customer. But when you go into product, you have to completely change your mindset. You're not building something for just one person or one entity anymore. You're building something for many different people. So I had to broaden my perspective. And when I saw a new requirement or a need to change our product, I had to constantly remind myself, it's like, okay, but have I considered all the aspects I should consider and not just like, oh, this one customer said this. So now I should build it and apply it to everybody. And I think that's a very common mistake that new product managers make when they shift their mindset or their or career from like a consultant or as a software developer, maybe not a software developer, but typically a consultant to a product manager is changing that mindset was very difficult. But with time, it became kind of second nature. But that was one of the challenges. The other challenge was working with engineers and, you know, under I kind of put myself in your position as a project manager, as a product manager is and I mentioned before, you kind of want to know what the right balance is
Right.
between how much details do you need to know about what's going into the product. Like, do you need to know every line of code that our engineer is writing? No, absolutely not. You don't need to know that. But you also need to know a little bit about how this product works. And if that means, looking at the code with the engineer and just having them walk through it, just a pseudo code of what the logic is, sometimes you do need to go into that level of detail. And as a consultant, I never saw that level of like, it's like lifting the hood of a car when you've
Hmm.
never actually seen the car, its inside. All you did is just drive it around. And maybe you've inspected the tires from the outside, but now you were actually lifting the hood. It's like, oh, wow, what is
Yeah.
all this? And it was overwhelming. And I didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't know how to communicate or talk about that with engineers and figuring out how to translate, what they're saying into other stakeholders, internal or external stakeholders, because you can't just tell your stakeholders exactly what your engineers told you because it's going to go right over
Hmm.
their head. So, developing that vernacular and being able to translate what your engineer told you into, a customer or an executive or other product managers that you work with, and changing your kind of perspective depending on who you're talking to. That is something that I had to learn, and it
Hmm.
wasn't easy.
This is a very important skill set to have in any customer facing role. But especially as a project manager, you should be able to adapt your speech to the different audiences that you may face. And you should be able to translate technical details into very simple words so your stakeholder would understand them. Speaking of which, if you haven't watched it, I have a video on stakeholder communication. Go check it out. But let's resume. I think now, because you have the perspective from both the consulting and services world and the project and engineering world,
Mm,
um, when you look at the big picture, you work for one SaaS company. And
mm,
so the goal is pretty obvious. You have customers, you want to make money, you want to sell more, you want to keep the customers happy.
mm,
But do you see a difference of goals between the services organization and the product department? And do
mm,
they conflict with each other?
mm. Yeah, oftentimes they do. And it's again because as a consultant, your primary goal is to make one customer happy at a time. And so if there is a requirement that your customer must have, your job is to advocate for it as strongly as you can within your organization. And again, as a product manager, you can't think of one customer at a time. You need to think about the product that applies to all customers. So there's naturally going to be some conflicts because a consultant's going to come and say, "Hey, I need this in the product." It's like it doesn't do this. My customer is a, X million dollars, annual recurring revenue. They're important. You got to make this work. And as a product manager, you do have to take that into consideration. How strategic is this customer? You can't completely ignore that, right? Because not all customers are the same. As much as we like to, be fair and treat every customer the same. That's not always the case. That's not the reality. But it's one piece of data. You can't be completely swayed by that information because you might be making a product decision that is going to be detrimental to pretty much everybody else if you just build it according to what this one customer wants. So a lot of the times it's understanding that ultimately we're trying to solve the same problem, or we're trying to get the same outcome, which is ensuring that the company is successful by ensuring that our customers are successful. But we're going about it in different ways. And we need to collaborate and see where both parties come from and empathize each other's point of view and work together to solve the problem that works for both of us, right? So a lot of the times it's like, okay, I'll get a request and it's a very specific solution in mind. Like a customer wants X. And if I was a junior product manager or not a very experienced one, I would be like, oh, this customer is very important or strategic. I should just take that and build it right away. And that's almost 100% of the time a mistake. Your
Yeah.
job is to figure out, why are they asking for this? What problem are they trying to solve? If you don't dig into that, then you might build a subpar solution for that one customer. And then that solution might be terrible for everybody else. But if you actually dig into why, what is the problem that they're trying to solve, and that's why they're proposing this, then you may be able to come up with another solution that still solves that one customer's problem, and it could potentially solve all the other customers' problem. And, seeing that and, you know, working through that tense atmosphere that you often run into because consultants like, oh, my project is late, I got to get this in, it's an important customer. It's important not to get flustered in that situation and try to look at the bigger picture while being empathetic to the consultant, because to them this could potentially feel like the end of the world. It's like, oh, if I
Yeah.
don't have this, I'm in big trouble. So you have to empathize, and you have to not just take the very first solution or request that they give. You have to dig into it. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, we're all professionals. And I think we understand that we are trying to achieve the same outcome, but maybe we're going about a different way. And as long as you have that mutual respect, I think, you know, 99% of the time you can work together and solve the problem. And oftentimes the solution is much better than what was initially proposed anyway. So it's hard, but it's rewarding if it's done right.
Yeah, this is very insightful. I think a lot of people in either services or products can take a lot of advice from what you just said
Right.
and try to work better together.
Right.
Dig in. In my opinion, this is actually what differentiates good product managers to bad ones. The good ones take the time to talk to their users and customers to really understand why they need the software and why they would buy it. Because at the end of the day, this is all about money. In SaaS organizations, the product is what is generating the recurring revenue. So product team and product managers don't really work on everything they want. They work on the features that potentially will bring the most amount of revenue. But where things start to conflict is that services team that implements said software are measuring their success usually based on customer satisfaction. So if the software starts to have a lot of problems or doesn't answer the need of the customer, that's where the services team starts pushing the product team to fix these issues. And I think that's super healthy. The services teams should be pushing the product teams to deliver better software so that the next implementations go smoother. I'm going to go back to some general topic, maybe a general question for you.
Mm.
If you had one advice or recommendation for anybody who wants to start with a consulting career,
Mm.
what would you tell them?
Mm. There's so many advices. But if I could just choose one.
Okay, maybe two.
Okay. I'll give two. And they're all stuff I already mentioned before, so it might sound like I'm being repetitive, but I really do mean this. And I really do think that this is important. Number one is stay curious. Never think that you have all the answers. No matter how experienced you are, no matter how many times you've seen this, stay curious. Dig into details. Find out why. Don't just say, "Oh, you want this." Yeah, I've heard that from different people. I know why you want it. Let me build it for
Mhm.
you, right? Just ask. It's like, "Oh, it's interesting." You know, what makes you say that, right?
Mhm.
That curiosity will ensure that you always grow, that you always adopt a a a learner mindset, and it has I think been the number one uh most important thing that I think has contributed to my career growth. So curiosity is number one. Number two, as I mentioned before, is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You will always be in a situation where you're just like freaking out because you don't have all the answers and you feel like you should. And it's okay. You don't have to have all the answers. But what's important is that you've prepared. You've done everything you possibly can. And if something happens that you didn't expect, try not to panic and, just stay calm and try to answer the question to the best of your ability. And if it's something that you absolutely don't know the answers to, don't lie. Say you don't know.
Yep.
Thank the person for asking the question because I'm sure it was an insightful one if you didn't have an answer to it. And then say, let me look into it and get back to you. But get comfortable with being uncomfortable, especially if you're starting out. And, if you have those two mindsets, then, uh, I'm confident that it's going to aid in your career as a consultant.
So it sounds to me that you probably have a story to share here. Was there a time that you can remember where you were put in a situation where you were the most uncomfortable?
Um, I obviously won't mention any names, but I this was probably my second or third project where I was a lead consultant, and this customer was a big global company, and they were implementing our software globally, and they had decided to fly in EHS specialists from all over the world, from Europe, from South America, from Asia, obviously from North America as well. It was a US based company, so we're meeting in US. So all in all, I think we had about 20 to 25 EHS specialists in this design workshop, and it was a 5-day design workshop. And I had to lead the conversation for this design workshop where we were covering 5 different applications. So we had to do one a day. And it's it's impossible to know everything about all those applications because they're actively being updated, every quarter, and you haven't implemented all of them because it's impossible. We have so many of them. So there were many applications that I've never implemented before, and I still had to, do the best I can to advise the customer on what the best course of action is. So I remember preparing for that design workshop. I think I had stayed up multiple nights just, going into my sandbox and trying those applications and clicking everywhere and trying to figure out why does it work this way and read as much documentation as possible. And documentation is one of those things where every company knows you should do it, but it's never a priority. So
Yep.
shortage is the norm. So there were many times where I didn't know why a product works a certain way. And, if I could afford it, I would ask the product manager. And product managers are busy people. I can say that because I am one and I'm always busy. And they're not always going to have the time to get back to your questions. And they would very much like you to read the documentation that they, painstakingly put together so that they don't have to answer all these questions every single time.
Definitely. Yeah.
But when they're not always available, you need to improvise. You need to figure out is like, okay, if I was a product manager, why would I build it this way? And try to understand the industry, try to understand what the solution solves, why it exists, and do the best you can to explain to a customer when they ask, is like, oh wait, the standard solution does this? That doesn't make any sense. Why is it doing that? And you have to have some sort of an answer. You can't be like, well, I don't know. It's a good question. What do you want? that's
Let's
that's
call
the
let's call the product team.
exactly. Exactly. So you have to have some sort of an answer, even if you don't know for sure that, okay, this is 100% the reason. But you can say, is like, oh, in my opinion, I think it was designed this way because of X, Y, and Z. And your answer should be logical. Your answer should be well thought out, and you should have thought those in advance, ideally. But if you haven't, then being able to think on the spot and being able to come up with an answer that is reasonable, I think that's a valuable skill. And being in those situations absolutely forces you to learn.
Yeah.
And so that design workshop was extremely uncomfortable, but I didn't want to show that to my clients. And I don't think they saw it. But I remember coming back to my hotel room on the first day and I just had body aches all over because I was just so tense. Like I didn't even know it, but subconsciously I'd been tensed up for 8 hours straight. And I came home and I was just exhausted. But that 5 day workshop probably propelled my career as a consultant more than, any amount of projects I did prior. And I'm so glad I went through it.
Yeah. I think for anybody who is considering a career in consulting, I hope you're not like scared with this story.
I'm
But
sorry.
all in all, like it worked out for Joonha, so it can
Yes.
work out for anyone.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um, all right, so we will be wrapping up shortly. There
Sure.
is one thing that I've asked you to prepare is
Mm,
one question for me.
right.
So let's see what you got.
Okay. So because you're my friend and we know each other personally, I know that at some point you also considered going into product or product management. Maybe not product manager, but product owner, product manager, whatever, going into product management. But I know that ultimately you decided not to take that path. And I know you and I had some conversations about it, and maybe you explained this already if in that case I'm a bad friend, but I wanted to ask what made you want to choose project management over product management?
So that's a loaded question. Thank you, Joonha. Um, when I started my career, I started as
Hmm,
a consultant, and then
right.
I eventually moved as a project manager, and that's definitely something that I knew I wanted to do.
Hmm,
Um, and then eventually, as yourself, I was curious about management,
hmm,
especially with an engineering background. Then I was considering it, but there was never the opportunity presented
hmm,
to me to take that path. And eventually, I got offered some other opportunities that led into deepening my knowledge about project management
right.
and becoming a leader, also coaching people, and those and which are also aspects that of my career that I really enjoy right now.
Got it.
And that's the reason why I never really completed my transition to product management.
Right.
Although I did some training, some certifications to get there. It's just at the end of the day, I think life is opportunities that are offered to you, and you just have to know to when to select the ones that are going to benefit you. And in
Right.
this
Right.
situation, I saw some opportunities and I just jumped on it.
Got
Was
it.
it what I initially planned? Probably not, but I think you could say that for a lot of different people. So
Gotcha.
there's no
Gotcha.
specific reason why I didn't go. It's more there are reasons why I chose what I do today.
Got it. Got
But good question. Thank you.
it. No problem.
um, And then the last question I have for you is a question from the previous person that was here with me that I interviewed.
Okay.
So I'll read it to you.
All right.
It's an interesting one.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
What is the most impactful piece of advice that you received from a mentor?
That's a great question. As a product manager, you're technically, I mean, not technically, we know I'm not a manager. I don't manage people. I'm still an individual contributor, but I'm managing the product and I work with engineers who build the product. But you still very much are expected to lead the team, even if you're not managing them, even if you're not having one-on-ones or doing, performance evaluations, you are still responsible for leading the team. And that expectation is placed on you as a product manager. And the advice that I got from a mentor is that don't think of yourself as you're part of the team. Think of yourself as you're leading the team. And so you need to, sometimes make decisions that may not be popular, but it's what's necessary and it's what's best for the customer. And it may be painful at the time, but it's ultimately the right thing to do. And you need to be the ones pushing for it. And a typical example is, you have some sort of feature you're building, something goes wrong, you're running out of time, and then you have to make a decision as, do we still push for this requirement or do we change it? Or either way, it's going to take more time. So do we cut scope or do we hold a line and says, no, this requirement is extremely important. Like without it, the experience is not going to be the same. The user adoption is going to be terrible. And it's your job to figure that out. It's your job to have that product sense. And it's your job to communicate that and to lead the team. And I think that's a very valuable advice I received from a mentor recently. And I take that to heart.
Yeah, that's a great advice. And I think it's very transferable to project managers and project management in general.
Right.
I'd add that project managers, scrum masters, product managers, or product owners, all these positions are are leadership positions.
Right.
And as you said, like you're technically an individual contributor, but you're a leader in your organization and you have to advocate for the right things.
Right.
As you said, you have to take unpopular choices. So as a project manager, if you have a strong deadline and you have to work overtime, then sometimes you have to make the decision that yes, the team will work overtime.
Mm-hmm.
And although you're not their manager, then you can make the decision that the project team will work overtime.
Right.
And the type of leader you are really define how others are going to perceive you and how successful you will be in those situations. Right. And but that's a whole different topic.
Right. That could be a whole different video.
Likely. Well, this was the last question. Thank you so much for taking the time for chatting with me, Joonha. I had an absolute blast today.
Me too.
I hope you also enjoyed it. Do you have any last words for our viewers?
Keep watching Pierre. Pierre, I think you're onto something, and I'm really excited to see, what other contents that you're going to create for this channel, and I'm rooting for you, and I think it's going to be amazing. So,
well,
yeah.
Thank you, Joonha. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Have a good evening.
Okay. Take care.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed watching Joonha talk about his experiences and his career as much as I did. And if you have any feedback for me, please leave it in the comment section down below. And if you're still watching and haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please go do that. Merci and au revoir.